Are you struggling to execute and grow your chest using the Incline Smith? If you are, stay tuned, watch this video, click the like button, subscribe, and comment down below for any other exercises that you want me to run through. I hope you enjoy. First things first, let's talk about the setup. You can see here that I have got the bench, as you can see, is at a low incline. So I'm doing a low incline Smith here. The bar, where I've set the bar at, is actually directly over my midline of my chest. Lots of people, when they think incline, they think all the way up near your clavicle or your collarbone. What this does is it takes a lot of tension off of the direct muscle, i.e. the pec, which is what we're aiming for, and loads it onto the shoulder joint. So when you're lining up the bench and the bar, make sure that the bar comes anywhere around the nipple line. Slightly above it is okay, but that's where we want to go when we're lining up our bar with our bench. So first things first, how to know where to grip the bar. So there's a few things that play a part in this. Now we've lined up the bar with our nipple. Now what we want to do is, where do we place our hands? A really easy way to think about it is thinking about the alignment of the joint. So we have the wrist and the elbow, and as you can see here, my grip is quite wide at the top, but the main part of this movement in a Smith machine press is actually the stretch position. You're not going to get much pec, you're still going to get some in the squeeze, but if we look here, this is a perfect example, is my elbow and my wrist are pretty much up and down from each other in a vertical plane. Now what this is going to do is it's going to take away a stability problem. So if your hands were too narrow, so say for example my hands were here, what that's going to do is it's going to take away tension from the pec and put it more onto the elbow. Now if they were too wide, that's then going to be fighting for stability. The range of motion wouldn't be as much for the pec either. So having your hand directly underneath your wrist directly over the top of your elbow is essential with this, especially for the most power output. Now we've spoken about where to put your hands, there's a little bit extra to the hand position. So you can see here, as I've wrapped my hand around the bar, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to jam the inner portion of my hand into the bar. Now there is a reason for this. This part of your hand is stacked over this part of your forearm. Now your forearm has two bones. You have a teeny tiny one, and you have a really thick one. Now if we stack into this part of the hand and jam it right in, we're then loading the bigger bone rather than a little bone. And what this is going to allow us to do is, lots of people get elbow and shoulder joint pain when they press heavy. By loading the inner part and the heavy and the thicker bone, we're now giving us stability, and we can control where our elbows go. Now if we load the outer part of the hand, our body is then going, right, we need to find stability. And you'll see people often flapping around their elbows, and what that's doing, what their body is doing, is going, oh shit, I can't find stability. And then typically shoulders will come out of play, elbows will come out of play, and that can lead to things over time. It's not going to hurt in one session, but over years and years of lifting, which is what we're hoping to be doing, this can play a massive factor. So you can see here that as my hands, I've jammed in the thick part, and now I'm wrapping round. What we can also see is, if we take a little pause here, my knuckles are up to the ceiling. Now there's a reason for this. If I was to be here, we're now thinking stability again. Yes, we're loading the meaty part of the position, but look at my hand as a straight line. There's a break in it. Now I'm trying to find stability again. Now if I'm here, I can control what my elbow does, and it's the same principle as loading the middle of the hand. We want our knuckles to be put towards the ceiling. With a Smith machine press, obviously we've got to roll it back, but take that into account when setting it up. Now that we have our hands in position, you can see that I keep pulling my shoulder blades backwards and forwards. Now there is a reason for this. You'll see a lot of people doing this. What we want to do is make sure that throughout the movement, our chest is always in front of our shoulders. So you can see my shoulder, my front delt is here, my pec is here. Now, as I come down, when I'm ready to lift this off, shoulders are always behind. I take a pause on the chest, and they never come in front. Now, what that means is that through this part here, in the stretch position, you can actually see my wrist is cocked back there, which arguably is lowering output. Where we have the front delt behind the chest is fully nice and stretched. It's as stretched as we can get. And we know that that's where the real money is in this movement. Then as I press through, I'm thinking about shoving my bicep across my body. But the shoulder doesn't need to come out of position to do that. What I see a lot of people do is as they press, they will round through to get that extra squeeze. Now, we've then got to try and find that back position again. So keeping that shoulder in front of that pec, behind that pec at all times, you can see the amount of work that's going on through the pec muscles here. And there's going to be a little bit of front delt, and that's absolutely fine. This is a compound movement. But you can see as we press through that it's even towards the back end of the set, it's all pec. We're actually going to roll it back and go and check out our foot position now. Now, you might think, well, what are my feet doing in a press? But actually, they are the point of stability. They are the point in contact with the floor, the grounding of this movement. Now, if your feet are unstable or you start wiggling them throughout the movement, you are taking energy away from the pec muscle and putting it into either your core or some other stabilizer movement. It's trying to find a path of resistance. So if we look at my feet here, which is very difficult because this thing's in the way, which I didn't take into consideration. My feet are in front of my knee, or in line with my knee actually, to be honest with this. And my heel is dragging into the floor. Now, if we roll this through a little bit to where I'm actually lifting, we can see that as I lift off, there's stability through the hip. I'm finding that position. And in a second when I lift off, you can see here that there's no movement at all through the quad. There is slight tension actually through the floor. So I'm using my quad ever so slightly to keep the rest of my body stable. And you can see even through the torso that nothing else is moving because the quad and the glute and the hamstring and the leg and the point of contact with the floor is all stable. Now, let's actually get into the movement itself. What am I thinking about when lifting the weight? So as I'm in this position here, I'm still setting up, I think, in this point in the video. As I lift off, what am I thinking about? First thing is elbow position. So you can see the elbows are slightly tucked in. I am thinking bringing that bar round and bring those elbows into my lats rather than back into my shoulders. And you'll feel a significant difference in the stability. Now what this is doing is the pec actually is in line with your rib cage, and so are your lats. So if you think about the other side, if I'm rowing it into the lat, then the pec is taking the full stretch. Whereas if at the top I'm rowing back into the shoulder, then the pec, yes, the top of the pec is going to take some tension, but the shoulders are also going to take some of the investment away. So that's what I'm doing. I'm keeping, you can actually see this here, if we talk about hand pressure, there's a lot of pressure on this point in the hand rather than the outside. And the reason for this is, again, it's stacking the joint over, and we're going to get a little bit more pec because as we use the outside part of the hand, there's going to be a little bit more tricep involvement. Now, we're not saying that there's going to completely isolate the pec and this, that, and the other, but it's going to take away some some tension from the elbow joint as well. So you can see as I press through here that you can see that there's a lot of power generating from that inside. So that is what I'm thinking about as I'm doing this. I am lowering the bar all the way down to my chest. Now, I understand that not everyone can necessarily have that range of motion. It's taken me a good amount of time to get to a point where I'm able to lower the bar all the way to my chest, but I believe this should be the goal for pretty much everyone. Now, the reason I say that isn't because it's necessarily going to grow you more, but there's 2 points. The first one, we're working the joint and the muscle through its full range. Now, as a health standpoint, from the health of the muscle itself, it's designed to do all of this. The fact that we've got to a point where we can't is something that I believe needs fixing. Now, the other point of going down to your chest is as we get stronger, or more, well, I suppose actually the better way to say this would be as we get more tired, we want that standard point. So we're making sure that actually it's coming down to the same point each time. This is why I'm a fan of deadlifting from a static point. So when you're doing, say, like an RDL and you stop in the air, well, the range kind of gets a little bit shorter as we go through the set. You go, oh, that was probably enough. But probably isn't a guarantee. Now, if you're touching your chest at the end of each rep, then you know you've not cut anything short. Even better, as you're learning to do this, take more of a pause than I am. The reason I'm able to do this is because I've done paused reps for well over a year now, and I feel like I just need to get a little bit more load on the bar, which is just where I'm at in my journey. The fact that I'm up to 2.5 plates for 7 reps is fantastic for me, but that's just where I am at in my journey. So just something to consider when taking a range of motion kind of tip and bias. Know where you're at, but I do think that the goal should be coming down to touch your chest. So we've spoken about the negative portion. What am I thinking about in the positive portion, or the actual engagement of the pec? What I'm doing is I've still got my hands underneath, so in that sort of position, and I'm thinking about scooping up. The bar's fixed, so this isn't going to be, you're not actually going to scoop it up and back. But what this is going to allow you to do is not what I see lots of people do, is where they start in a perfect position and then do that. So what you're doing by that is then adding load to shoulder because it's trying to find path of least resistance. So by tucking in and pressing up and back, you're constantly moving through the pec movement. And this is going to allow you to recruit more pec fibers. Will you have to move the weight down? Probably. If not, then you've got really, really strong pecs. But it's going to allow us to get the most out of that movement. So that's the first thing I'm thinking about. Secondly, I think I mentioned this earlier, but what I'm actually doing is instead of just pressing up, I'm thinking across. So as we come round with our arm, you can even do it here standing. You can see and feel the pec contracting, whereas just pressing up doesn't actually feel as much pec. So I think about getting my elbows together in the squeeze position and then away from each other in the stretch position. Now this is a little bit more technical and maybe you're not there yet, but that's absolutely fine. This is something we can progress to get to. So that's pretty much it when it comes to setup and execution. I'm going to touch on how to progress through the movements. We've all had the question, how much you bench? So this is one of the main questions that I get asked. And to be honest, if I said I incline Cybex Smith press Mark 1 2.5 plates aside for 7, people will look at me like I'm stupid. But realistically, as someone that's aiming for hypertrophy, it doesn't really matter the number on the bar. But there is a point where you need to increase it. So what's the signs that I'm looking for when a set is done, and when do I know that I am ready to progress? So if we look at these last couple of reps, so I think this might be 6. So that's rep 6. So there's one more in there, I believe, I would think. So you can see that it's sticking. My body's fighting for that. Now, anyone else might have seen that there's probably another one in there. Maybe not. Depends on your training age and your work ethic and your, whatever it might be. To me, that is a point of that last rep. I had to hyper focus on my chest doing all the work because things wanted to take over, as you could see from the movement in the arms. That to me is 0 reps in reserve from a mechanical tension point of view. Now, what do I mean by mechanical tension? When I'm talking mechanical tension, I'm talking tension across the target muscle. So the target muscle being the pec. Another rep I could have got out, but it would have been shoulder and tricep doing all the work, and it's just going to give me false data running into next week saying I got 8 rather than I did 7. So my goal would then to be either get 9 or whatever it might be. So let's talk about the progression from there, as I've just mentioned it. How do you know when to move up the weight? So there's 3 components to progressive overload training, in my opinion. The first one is the actual load on the bar. The second one is how many reps you're doing. And then you've got the variable aspect, which I think is what a lot of people miss out on. So the first one is quite straightforward. More weight on bar, more progression. Great. This is as long as your form is standard, meaning it looks the same. The only thing that doesn't look the same in the form is how many plates are on the actual bar. The number of reps, again, quite self-explanatory. If you got 7 last week, let's get 8. I typically give my clients a rep range. So in this exercise here, my rep range was 6 to 9 repetitions. That means I need to fail with a weight between 6 to 9 reps. Let's say, for example, I got this for 9 reps this time. The next week, I would add a small amount on, typically either a 1.25 kilo plate aside, or if I felt strong, maybe a 2.5 kilo plate aside. We're taking the micro jumps. We're not adding anything more than that on. And that's going to give us, hopefully, a failure point into the 6 to 9 rep range for next week. However, because I only got 7, and the 7th was a grinder, so there's the argument that next week I would be happy with 7, but with that 7 to feel more comfortable than that. If I get 8 happy days, then I've progressed, but I'm definitely not adding load. Now, the third one that I spoke about was the variable component. Now, the variable component is something I'm big on. Now, let's say, for example, you're stuck at 2.5 plates aside for 7 and you can't seem to budge it. Whatever reason, that 8th rep just eludes you. Let's take the same weight. And now we've got a controlled negative, we've got a controlled pause, and we explode. Let's change something in that. So maybe you might count 2 or 3 seconds on the way down. Maybe you might go 1, 2 in when the bar's on your chest before pressing. We're just making this harder, not heavier. We're still going to create stimulus to the muscle. One of my favorite sayings is the muscles cannot count. So if they could, I would be loading up 4 or 5 plates in there, risking injury and hoping for a bigger chest. But that's sadly not the way it works, and it's sadly not as fun as that. So that's something to consider before progressing your movements. I hope you like this video. We're going to leave it there. There's nothing really else for me to say. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. Like, share, and subscribe, all that good stuff. All of the links to my supplement, peptide, and gym pin sponsorships are down below with any discounts that you might be able to get from there. So again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll speak to you next time.